All right, so between these two, a lot of people think they're both equal to 25. Now you know that only this one is really equal to 25. This one's negative out in front means that it'll be negative 25. So what? How often are you ever going to see that? Actually, you see it a lot. Because anytime you have a variable, what you have is an open parentheses. That's what a variable should be. If you can't find one in there, then there aren't any more, and you have to get your own. Okay, if you have an open parentheses squared, and then you drop the number in, and the number is, for instance, negative 7, it'll look like this. That negative is inside the parentheses. And therefore, that negative is on the 7, and therefore be negative 7 times negative 7, which would be positive 49. This one is not what you have. That's not, a lot of people think it is. They think, oh, I dropped in a 7 or a negative 7 for x, so I'll just write it like this. That won't work. That'll give you an answer of negative 49. So again, when you have something like e equals mc squared, really what you have is an empty spot equals empty spot squared. Okay? Except that in this particular equation, does anybody know one of these numbers? Yes? Nope. Thank you for trying. Yes? E is energy, yep. Yeah, but there's one of these is actually a number. Yes. One of them is the speed of light, squared. That's correct, and that's this. And this is 186,000 miles per second per second. That's the whole squared part of it. Anyway, so moving on, just think of variables as empty parentheses, and you'll be okay. This one, all 4 of the things you see on the screen right there are all the same thing. They're all ways to write the square root of 25. This one is a square root sign that doesn't extend because in the early days of typewriters and then eventually computers, they could only have like a little spot to display a character. They couldn't have one character go over the top of other characters, and so they couldn't make a square root sign do that. So a lot of times when you see this, it means square root. Just like this does. Okay, so they mean the same thing. They're both, the answer's 5. Did you know that on a square root symbol there's actually a little 2 there? It's true. You just don't show it because square root is the most common of the roots, and if you don't put it there, it just saves you time and it makes it a little simpler sign. But there's technically a little 2 right there, which of course leads to the possibility that there could be a little 3 right there, and then it would be a cube root. Or a little 4 right there, and that would be a 4th root, which means what times what times what times what would give you 25. All right, back to all 4 of these mean square roots. So that means 25 to the 1/2 power also means square root. If that's true, then you should be able to put in on your calculator, ready? 25 caret means power of. And don't put in like this, 1 divided by 2. You know why? Because it'll go 25 to the power of 1, and then it'll divide the whole thing by 2. You don't want that. You need a parenthesis here. 25 to the power of, the caret key is over on the right-hand side. I don't know. Doesn't even look like a caret. I agree. But it is. Ask the English teachers. It's their fault. Yes? I am recording right now. Thank you for asking. It's on this little dealy bob right here, and it like minimizes itself. But if you look close, yes. But thanks for asking. Okay. I hope that your answer came out to 5. Raise your hand if it did. Okay, do you believe me then? So the 1/2 power means the same thing as square root. All right. So look at these for a second. Remember, this is the same as this. These are all different though. They all have a square root sign in them, so they're all square roots. Okay, so what's the square root of 25? That one's 5. That one's easy. What's this one? Negative 5. If there's a negative outside, it's just negative 5. Then what if the negative's inside? 5i, remember that? Because really this is square root of 25 times the square root of -1, and that's 5, and the square root of -1 is I. So if anybody asks you what's I, it's the square root of -1. You've learned that. I'm reinforcing it now, so hopefully it sticks longer. All right, and 2 seconds ago I told you what that means. So can you answer that question? 9 is correct, because it's the square root of 81. All right, moving on. Cube roots. A cube root's just like a square root, except it's got a little 3 out front instead of a little 2 that you never saw before, but it was there. So cube root also can be done like this. So why don't you try it? What's 8 to the power of 1/3? Maybe you can just do it in your head. What is it? 2 is correct. Because why? Because 2 times 2 times 2 makes 8. And whereas square roots want something times something, cube roots want something times something times something. All right? Now, cube roots do have a little catch to them that's important. Okay, let's just do one more normal cube root. What's the cube root of 27? 3. Because 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27. So the answer is 3. How about this one? Oh, what? No, there's no variable in there. I'm glad you're remembering that if you have variables in there. What do you mean, -2? Are you going to do the square root or are you going to do the cube root? Because what is this one? It's a square root. There's no 3 there. So it's a square root. So really it's supposed to be negative square root of 8. And the square root of 8 is really square root of 4 times the square root of 2. So that it's negative and then 2 and then root 2. There's your answer, -2 root 2. And I know it's kind of a trick question. Seemed like it should be. It's under the big topic, cube roots. And then all of a sudden it's not cubed. Well, it wasn't. There was no 3 there. I did. Yes. 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 You can't leave your answers in the square root of 8. You have to reduce them. All right, so next thing. This one. Is that a cube root or a square root? Square root, but you have no idea what the square root of 125 is, but you would know what the cube root of 125 is. So what is it? So there's a 5 involved, I agree. Now, is the answer 5i or is the answer -5? -5. But wait, you say. The negative's underneath the root. I thought those always had an I in them. Really what it comes down to is what times what times what will give me 125. Would you agree that -5 times -5 times -5 gives you 125? Therefore, the answer is -5. You don't need any imaginaries for that. Okay? It's only square roots that need imaginaries. And 4th roots. And 6th roots. And 8th roots. That's right. Even roots. All right. You're smarter than the average bear now. Okay. That's a saying from way back. Yogi Bear. You ever heard of Yogi Bear? Hey, boo-boo. Let's go down to the picnic ground and get some picnic baskets. Believe it or not, it sounds a lot like Yogi Bear. But anyway, that one, absolute value 3 is what? Good. What's that one? Yep, absolute value is just strip off the negatives. The official definition of an absolute value is how far away it is from 0. That is 3 away from 0, and so is that. Okay, now back to this guy, and we were just doing him a second ago. Is that 5 squared, or is that -5 squared? That's 5 squared, which is what? So the final answer? -25. All right, moving on. Combinations, multiple kinds in one problem. All right, here's one thing that a lot of kids don't understand. If I put this 2 over 1/2, and they type it into their calculator, can you get why a kid would type in 2 divided by 1 divided by 2? But it's not right. Know the reason? Because technically, when you have a fraction, you have parentheses around the top and the bottom. But on the top, there's only a single number, and you don't need parentheses around a single number. But on the bottom, you do need these parentheses. So if you type in this on your calculator versus you type in this on your calculator will be forced to do this first, wouldn't it? And that's what you want it to do. Because if you don't say that, your calculator will go, oh, these are tied, so I'm going to do the one on the left first. And it'll give you a totally different answer. All right. All right. Just to finish this, what is 2 divided by 1/2? Well, I'd rather not do divide. I'd rather do 2 times, and instead of dividing by 1/2, I could times by 2 over 1, and the answer would be 4. That's the right answer. If you do this on your calculator, it would say 2 divided by 1 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then you'd get a totally wrong answer. If you put in the parentheses like I just told you you should, your calculator would do this part first. 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. 2 divided by 0.5 is like 2 divided into halves. You have 2 pies, and you divide it into halves. You'll have 4 half pies. I don't know if that works for you or not, but the moral of the story is if you saw this and you wanted to put in your calculator, what would you need to do? Parentheses around the top and the bottom? Yes, because there's no single numbers here. So you need these parentheses and you need those parentheses. All right, next kind I want to do about combinations. Combinations are going to come up in your homework where you'll have something like that. So now, what are those like? Remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Aunt Sally must have done something terrible. Actually, no, she didn't. But one thing Aunt Sally never told you is where square roots fit in. What good is Aunt Sally anyways if she can't tell you what square root fits in? How about the absolute values? Do you see absolute values in this anywhere? No. Just so you know. Are absolute values or square roots more like parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, or subtract? They're like parentheses, and they're also kind of like exponents. So generally, they're in the front. The reason I say they're kind of like exponents is, remember how I said square root is actually to the power of 1/2? So it really doesn't matter much whether you call them parentheses or exponents, but if you really, really, really want to know, the official definition is these are all grouping symbols. Just like parentheses group things, you know? Putting a square root over something groups those things together. So technically, square roots and absolute values all fall into this category of grouping symbols. So they're all first. Well, if you have a whole bunch of things that are supposed to be first, what do? You go to the ones that are most inside. Do you remember having parentheses inside of other parentheses like this? And if you have parentheses inside parentheses, they're the ones that go first, right? Same idea. If you have a problem like this, and I got square roots and absolute values, and they're supposed to be like tied, well, you do the innermost ones first. So I start in here. Is there anything to do in -3? No. So the next thing I do is out from there, which includes this absolute value there. So what would that be? 3. And the next thing I would do is what's underneath the square root. What's underneath the square root is like it's in a parenthesis. So I got to do this. So 3 squared, 9, and then I do the square root of that. 3. Now, some of you might be thinking, shouldn't that be absolute value of 3? No, that's only if it's a letter. If it's a variable, remember if it was like this, and you do this to it, then the answer is absolute value of x. But if it's just a number, you don't have to worry about that. If it's just a number like 5, then the answer would be, start with squaring this, 25, take the square root of that, and yes, they just remove each other. Answer's 5. One more little thing that seems to be coming up a lot. What's that? Square root of 25, which is 5. Catch you on the pattern here. Square root of 3.1 times the square root of 3.1. Take a wild guess what it is. 3.1. So whatever is underneath the root. Okay? Yes. Yes, at the end of class. Remind me, but we're not at the end of class yet. As soon as I stop teaching, yes, we'll watch the news. Okay, moving on. These are kind of confusing because our computer lost its ability to space correctly when they put on the new version of Smart Notebook, like Snart Notebook 11 messed up our spacing on all of our files. So some of my smartboards aren't going to be as pretty anymore. They're working on a fix for it. But anyway, so I just ignore those answers that I scribbled out. Now, those are what's left is the questions. So what's 5 squared? 25. What's -5 without the parentheses squared? -25. All right, this one? How about that one? Good. How about that one? 8 or -8? Let's have a fight. How many say 8? How many say -8? There's more -8s. Anybody want to argue the point? You're pretty confident you're right? Confident you're right? Why? What do you think it is? What do you think it is first? Take it to -8 and tell me why. That becomes positive 4. And then you times it one more time times a negative. And you're right, it's negative 8. Negative people, you always win. No, actually, it's the other way around. But anyway, how about number 6? 2 cubes, just 2 cubes. What is it? 8. All right, moving on to the the square root kind. What is the square root of 25? 5. How about the square root of negative 25? 5i. How about the square root of negative of the square root of 16? Negative 4. How about square root of negative 16? 4i. How about this one? Square root of 16. Just leave you with an easy one. Okay, this one, square root of 75. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I could reduce this down. Yes, sir. Mr. A. I agree. Square root 25, square root 3, and then what's that become? 5 square root 3. Very good. This one right here is negative square root of 3. It's that little symbol where it doesn't extend over, but it means square root. So what is that? It's just negative square root of 3. You can't simplify it. It just is what it is. Okay. How about the root 28? Could you simplify that one? Yes, you can. Try it on your paper right now. Square root of 28 with a negative on the inside. Try it on paper. Square root, we're doing this one right here. The square root of negative 28. How many of you think there's an I in your answer? You're right. How many think your answer is just I root 28? Good. Let's see if it's not that. There's an I, but I'm going to show you how I broke it up. Really, I'd break this up into 3 parts. Root something times root something times root something. And the last one you do is handle the negative. So it's negative 1 times, how would you break it up? 7 times 4 is 28. Good. So then I'd go 2 root 7. Sorry. I. But we don't leave it like that. We put all the stuff in front of the root. So it's 2i root 7. And writing a 2 when I want to write a 7. There. Raise your hand if you had that one right. That's 3/4 of the class anyway. Okay. And I think we've done enough. Those absolute values are pretty easy. I guess I'll just ask you a couple. What's the negative of the absolute value of 4? Good. How about absolute value of negative 8 is? And negative of the absolute value of 23? Negative 23. And then that last one? All right. By the way, if they put a 2 out in front of that, that means 2 times that. So it would be like 14. Okay. If you put a bunch of 2 right in front of 3 or a 4, it just means times. All right. Good enough. You guys know how to do this stuff. And here comes your worksheet. And yes, I'll turn on the news.